Let's go position by position, Badger fans. Offense, defense. We got Curtis Holland on the show. Where are we better than last year's team? Where are we maybe a little worse? Where are we a push? Let's use that to look at how far our team has maybe come this offseason and compare it to a couple of those early season tilts we got on the schedule. Locked on Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I appreciate you. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. As the playoffs have kind of finished for the year until it's firing back up, baseball's here. FanDuel's here to help you through the summer. Booster bonus daily, all day, every day, all summer long for everybody. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is the Locked On Podcast Network where you can find all your shows. That's what we're a part of. Really proud to be part of that as always. And we got Curtis Holland jumping on the show, playmaker in the Discord. Good friend of the show, really sharp guy. Excited whenever I can have you on the show, man. And we're gonna look at last year versus this year kind of holistically, position by position, and see where we think we're better, worse, or the same.
Yeah, exactly. And it was great to meet you guys at the practice. I think going to the practice, to be totally honest, really sort of changed what I think our floor is, just for me personally, because I hadn't really had an opportunity, to look at the players, and it kind of got me thinking, where are we better and where are we worse than last year, and that kind of gives us a good sense of where the team's at. So I guess we could start with quarterback, since that seems to be the topic of discussion over the last couple of days. When you look at the quarterback room as a whole, I think, without a doubt, to me, it's a better room. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Namely, is that for backup, Braden Locke is a better version of Braden Locke was last year. So at minimum, our floor has been raised. But then you look at Tyler Van Dyke and Tanner Mordecai from last season. And I love Tanner Mordecai. I won't ever say anything ill about him. He was a great football player. But I do believe that Tyler Van Dyke is a better quarterback. When you watched a lot of the games last year with Mordecai, the biggest issue he had was really letting plays develop, seeing the field. Now, he had to run a few times maybe earlier than he would have wanted to. But one of the key things I noticed that was different between him and Van Dyke is that there was a couple plays at our practice and that have been happening over the course of the camp that, Tyler Van Dyke's been forced to scramble out the pocket. Well, the difference was when Mordecai scrambled, he would look to run, whereas Tyler Van Dyke looks to find passing lanes. And not only does he look to find them, he ends up finding them because he's got the arm strength to hit those players. So I think that overall, Tyler Van Dyke raises our quarterback ceiling. And I think overall the room will be improved this season.
I hear all that. And so the depth is better. I think that's a really big point you're hitting on. Because Locke is better, quite frankly. You have a healthier version of LaCrue, Mabry's here. The depth overall is just better, right? You have a deeper quarterback room, and that's important. The number 2 is a lot better. I think that the starters, and I talked about this in yesterday's show, are kind of a push to me. I think I think Van Dyke is going to look better this year simply because the pieces around him are better. He's a different type of quarterback, but I made this point in the Discord, right? Tanner Mordecai looked pretty darn good at SMU, and he's already looking pretty good in the 49ers, kind of training camp, fall camp. He's drawn pretty impressive praise there. So if he looked good before he got to Wisconsin and he looks good after Wisconsin, to me, the issue is probably what Wisconsin did around him last year. But that being said, I agree with you. I think the depth is better. And if I consider those quarterbacks kind of the starters a bit of a wash, I think we're probably slightly better there.
Yeah, I mean, and, here's where I look at that and I look at what Wisconsin gives us this year. Tyler Van Dyke gives us the ability to utilize and maximize that improvement on the rest of the team. There's no doubt in my mind, and you can watch again, he's got a stronger arm than Mordecai did. He sees the field better than Mordecai did. To me, he's a better quarterback. Again, Mordecai, great leader, athlete, fast, can run a 4.5. I'd rather have my quarterback be a better quarterback than a better runner. And when you watch, his highlights from SMU, I'll be honest, it was SMU. The talent that he played against was not that great, and everybody forgets. Do you know who his number 1 weapon at SMU was?
I do.
It also happens to be Patrick Mahomes' number 1 weapon right now in the NFL. So, at the end of the day, it's like, you live and die by the weapons you have. But I just think overall, Tyler Van Dyke gives us a little bit more than Mordecai did.
I think that's fair. Let's go running backs. I think this year's room is better. And I'll say this. During spring, I said this was a push. because I thought as much flack as Braylon Allen sometimes gets, he's still an NFL running back. He's still a guy you have to replace. But I think the freshmen have exceeded expectations. We didn't realize, I think, how good Tawee Walker might be. We didn't realize how a reshaped Jackson Aker could look. I think this room's better than last year, despite the fact that you lost Braylon Allen. And quite frankly, I think this is one of the deepest running back rooms. I made the point the other day. Not the best, but this might be like the deepest running back room I can remember at Wisconsin, when I think you can legitimately go 5, maybe even 6 deep here and be okay with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, when you look down the list, you're basically slotting Walker in for Braylon Allen, right? Both will kind of function the same purpose in the offense. They're both power backs, maybe not the fastest guys in the room, but can get upfield and can punish guys when they get in the hole. And the reason I really like Walker a lot as comparison to Braylon, I think Braylon, in terms of much maligned and talked about, he didn't really fit the style of this offense. Take a while to really get going. He was great as an eye tailback, and he was great in the back of the pistol, which we finally figured out. It seemed like the week of Nebraska, but he was injured a lot last year. You slot in Tawee Walker, who has a pretty robust history of not being injured. Knock on wood. I probably shouldn't have said that, but but he is a spread back. He fits this offense significantly better than Braylon does. Not only that, he's been playing running back his whole career. Braylon's been playing for 3 years. Tawee knows where the holes are, knows what to look for, knows when to cut, when to not cut, when to go upfield, when to get what he can, and when to try to get to the outside. So that right there, I think at minimum, Tawee replaces exactly what Braylon gives us. And then the rest of the list is just everybody's better. I mean, Chez, we get Chez. We didn't have Chez last year, so that's positive. You get a year better at Aker. You get a year better Yakimelli, who's been tearing it up the last few days in camp. And then you get freshmen that are going to be studs for us down the road. I 100% agree.
How many, really quick, not to make this inside, how many running backs get meaningful reps this year? How deep can they go?
I think everybody will play. I don't know if meaningful is relative. I think you'll see a lot from Chez, Walker, and Tawee, Chez, Tawee, and Aker. And I think you'll see Aker because they'll use him in more H-back spots. You'll see him a lot on the field. And then I think you'll probably get more of the freshmen, and maybe kind of even split between the freshmen and Yakimelli, sort of behind that. And then if someone gets injured, maybe someone steps up. Maybe if you continue to see Dylan and Darian improve, you might see them get more reps too. But that's kind of how I envision it to start the year.
Yeah, I'm right there with you as well. I'll kick this one to you to start receiver this year, last year.
So it's interesting. This is an interesting position. I will say for me, I think it's better for 2 reasons. One, our best player is going to be better this year. Will Pauling has been absolutely tearing up camp. I think he might be the best player on the offense. Watching him play when we were out of practice, he looks faster, he looks stronger, he looks better overall. So that's going to be a big positive for us. Bryson Green, I think you could argue between him and DK being sort of the number 2 receiver on the team last year. I think you started to see, DK sort of fall off a little bit as the season went on, started weighing on him. I think he got injured a little bit, and he struggled also. I think his big thing was with physicality. That was one thing he really kind of had a tough time with, whereas Bryson doesn't really have that problem. You start to see him come on a little bit more toward the end of the season last year. So I think Bryson is improved from last year. I think that helps us. And then, behind that, you have a Trech, you have a CJ Williams, you have a Vinny Anthony, and then a couple other guys that are still fighting in the background. I think they, at minimum, can replace what they gave you last year, if not get better. I think CJ Williams is taking tremendous strides. I think Anthony can replace the production that Bell had that we lost. And then I think Trech is going to be lights out for us. So I think it's definitely an improved room.
Yeah, I at this the cautionary sake of being like too optimistic here, I think this is pretty robustly better. I really do. Listen, as much as DK gave you at times and Skylar Bell showed in flashes, Skylar Bell also dropped a bunch of passes and DK disappeared in big games. I think you're dead on with the physicality. He struggled with press coverage. He couldn't get off it. Bryson's going to give you more of that. I think Vinny's a year better. Chris Brooks, who just continues to make play after play, was injured last year and really didn't get into the mix. I think he's going to have a functional role this season. And then you have the emergence of Trech Kekahuna, who, as an upside player, can give you something that none of those departing guys did. I think you have CJ Williams in year 2. You mentioned in the Discord, there's very much like a bump, and then this is kind of that post-hype fall where people, I think, are now a little too down on him and have forgotten the pedigree and some of the things he can potentially do. I think this room is pretty markedly better, and I also say that acknowledging last year's room dramatically underwhelmed for some of the pieces in there. I thought they didn't play well enough, but I think this room is better. I'm right there with you. Let's go tight end. I think last year's is actually, to me, a little bit better. Not drastically, but you had a veteran in Rucci who I think you knew what you're going to get, who was really physical, led the tight end room in catches, which was not, listen, that wasn't a big bar to jump last year. It was 13, I believe. But just a really physical veteran presence that you knew you could count on. You knew could control the line of scrimmage. You knew could set an edge. You knew would be in the right spot. You still had Tucker Ashcraft in last year's roster. Certainly he's a little bit better this year. But I think last year you at least had that veteran you could lean on. This year it's Ashcraft, maybe Nowakowski a little bit, who you also had last year. And then you have some question marks behind them with youth and transfers. So I'm going to give a little bit of an edge to last year's tight end room just based on some of the veterans you had in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably for the most part agree. I think, at minimum or at maximum, it's probably a push. I mean, Rucci was a great blocker. I think we're going to miss him a lot more than we realize because, one of the big things in this offense is tight end blocking. It's very important, especially for screens and setting the edge on certain plays, coming across on the split flow kind of plays. So that will be missed. I think that's tough. I think, Ashcraft is a year better. I think he'll be a better blocker this year, which is good. I think he'll get that some from Nowakowski as well. But yeah, I mean, this room is probably 1 to 2 years away from really hitting his peak. I think the future is bright, but I don't think this is the year for him.
Yep, right there with you. And I'll also point out, some of these are very different, right? We're going to get into linebackers later, but the difference in some of these gaps is really wide. And in some of these gaps, like, I don't think the gap between last year's tight end room and this year's tight end room is going to make or break 1 or 2 losses. Like, I just think if push came to shove, I would probably take that group. But this is not a dramatic difference to me. And I'm pretty excited about what Tucker Ashcraft could potentially do this year. I think he's going to replace, in theory, he's going to replace a lot of what Rucci did for you last year. And that'll
I like a lot of the upside of the young guys too. I think that the future's bright.
Yeah, I agree there. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We got to get back to offensive line, but we got to get to our sponsors here. We're going to do offensive line and then defense next, and then get into a little bit of USC Bama talk as well. Better or worse than last year for this team with Curtis Holland, playmaker. A quick break for our friends of the show. And a quick second to, as always, say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of this community. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the #1 source for all your sports betting needs, all your sports betting information, whatever you want to do as football is almost here. Like, we're a couple weeks away from football, and that means get your futures in right now. If you are optimistic and bullish on the Badgers, this is a great time. Head over to FanDuel, get your futures bet. If you think you're going to win 7-8 games, you'll be able to get ahead of that curve. Also great time, parlay spreads, teasers, baseball still going on, whatever you need to do over at FanDuel.com. They're hooking customers up all summer long, boost or bonus daily. Again, I always say this, please do it responsibly, but have fun with it, enjoy it, spice up your sports weekend. Head over to FanDuel.com, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. FanDuel.com to get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, which has a 24/7 live college football streaming channel. Go check out Locked On College Football today with Spencer McLaughlin. All the biggest stories in college football as the season's coming up. Make sure you go check that out. All right, let's do offensive line. I'm very curious where you're at on this one, Curtis. Offensive line last year to this year.
Yeah. So offensive line is interesting, and that's probably the position I left the open practice with the most questions on. I would argue that when you put our top 5 starters in, Nelson, Brunner, Renfro, Huber, and Malman, I would say that that's a better offensive line starters, and I think they're all improved from last year. But once you kind of get behind that, there's just a massive gap. I mean, the big issue is we lost a ton of the guys who were maybe a class below our starters to the portal and whatnot, and now we're relying on a lot of really young guys, redshirt freshmen, true freshmen, to really sort of fill those gaps, and that can be concerning. It's going to be a long season. We know Malman's already, taking some snaps off of camp for the last few days. Don't really know what that's about, but if we lose him, we're going to have to put a true freshman on the outside, and that's a little concerning. I'm glad they put Barrett Nelson out there. He's a couple of years older in the strength training, a little bit longer, so maybe that kind of helps spell Haywood a little bit, so it's not all the pressure put on him. But that's where I get concerned. That there was a lot of pressures given up by some of the younger guys in the camp practice, and that's where I think, for me, I would say if we were guaranteed no injuries, I'd say it's an improvement. But right now, I kind of have to say push just based on that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. Is it fair to call it? Because that's what I have. I have push. I think there's a lot of hype. I think justifiably so with the starters. I think the starting unit could be really good, man. It could be one of the better lines we've had, at least in the last 4 or 5 years. I think Renfro's the key. I think the tackles will be better. I love Bruner in the starting lineup. But you look back to last, and you lost to Trey Weddick, who might start at Indiana. You lost to Rucci, who could start at Penn State, right? You lost Bortolini to the draft. Michael Furtney played 13 games last year. You're starting to talk about all these guys who weren't heralded, but you could put any of those guys in for the most part and not freak out. Like, at least know we're going to get competent snaps here. We can go and survive some injuries. And sometimes those injuries are just for a couple series, and you got to be able to survive in the middle of a game. And that's where it's a little sketchy if to have to rely on multiple freshmen potentially in the 2 deep if it came down to that. But I do think the starters are better, right? So I didn't really know how to square this because you are going to need that depth. You and I both know this. You're going to need that depth.
I think you call it a push. I think you have to. I mean, like Leighton Nelson, if he could play, that might be maybe you say improvement. But again, like it's going to be a long season, and it's going to be tough. So we'll definitely see. I think there's going to be a lot of teams trying to blitz us this year, so it'll be interesting to pick that out.
Yeah, I'm going to go push too. And this could also be a scenario where early in the year, later in the year, that depth is going to develop as these guys in the 2 deep to freshmen. Yeah. So
and don't get it twisted. I mean, I'm super high on a Haywood, a Mandel. Those guys would be awesome for us, but not a couple games into a freshman season. So
yeah. I'm right there with you, by the way. Like, offensive line depth has quickly become my number one concern on this team. Let's go defense line. I'll take this one to start. I think it's better. I know you lost a couple depth pieces, but quite frankly, the Paez type, that group there, I think and Rodas Johnson, I think you just swapped them out with Lane and Hills. And I kind of like that exchange, to be honest. I think Lane is the best player of that group, and Hills is going to give you depth. And then everyone else is a year better. So I like Barton. I like in those roles. I like Thompson a year better. I think Kurt Neal, 2 years now off that ACL injury. He's looking pretty quick and disruptive. And then there's a few younger pieces that could conceivably, Dylan Johnson, give you a few reps. I think it's, again, this to me is similar to like the tight end discussion we have. I don't think it's drastically better, but I do think it's a better group.
I agree. And I agree for a couple of different reasons. I mean, one, I do feel like sort of Rodas Johnson and Gio Paez were sort of at the end of their time at Wisconsin. I think they were looking to move on sort of at the end of the season. You kind of saw that, and it was reflected in some of the sentiments of the team. But a guy like Kurt Neal, I mean, you saw him in the bowl game absolutely obliterate LSU's O-line. I mean, that was crazy. JTJ, he looks much stronger and faster. Ben Barton, just a year better. He's going to give us solid reps. And then the transfers, Brandon Lane, I think has been a major win for us. I think he comes in as a 6'3", 6'4", 300-pound guy who's an athlete, who's just at minimum going to be a pain in the ass to block. And then you got Hills, who finally sounds like he's starting to come into his own on this defense. And if you can get a couple of young guys to come in too, but the reason I feel good about the depth is because, and we can kind of move into the next group here too. They moved Ernest Willer out to outside linebacker. You don't do that if you don't feel confident in your depth. The D-line coming into the year, biggest concern we had. Well, now they're like, well, we have a D-lineman, but we want to get him on the field. Let's move him outside linebacker.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's go to linebacker. I'll let you kick this one off, although I can't imagine we're in too much of a disagreement on linebacker.
No, it's the linebacker, I think, is the most improved unit. I mean, and it was so glaringly obvious at the camp. I mean, linebackers are the best unit on our defense, and it's not really particularly close. I mean, like, you see Jaheim Thomas is so fast. He is up and down that line. He can drop in coverage. He's around every tackle. You look at the edge guys, Leon Lowry and Pius are going to live in the backfield of defenses. Anelu Lafaele, he was in with the twos, but he was absolutely obliterating. Looked like a young Herbig out there. I don't think I saw Chaney much when we were at the open practice, although it sounds like he's a really good leader. But I was really impressed, probably most, with Christian Allegro. I think he's going to be a bigger, more athletic Chenal in a year or two. I mean, I saw him absolutely obliterate that. He took out, not only took out Brunner, he half knocked over Renfro. And delivered the hits. I mean, he's going to be a beast for us. And he was the guy we had on the spy. You know what I'm saying? And he's delivering that kind of hit. Like, that's going to be awesome. I mean, the linebackers were all over the field making plays. They could stretch the field. They could run down skilled guys. I mean, our linebacker room is substantially better. Yeah,
it's crazy better. And it's funny you mentioned, I forgot that Allegro was our spy last year, which is really indicative of what we had in that room, right? I don't think they necessarily even wanted Allegro to be that guy. Like, they just didn't have a Jaheim Thomas. They didn't have a piece out there to do it. You mentioned Chaney. Chaney came back he didn't really play in that open period, but he came back afterwards for the night scrimmage. Dude, he looked great. I'm telling you right now, like, all this talent that came in, there's a reason the coaching staff continues is like, yeah, Chaney is like 1A in this group. And he looked, I'm telling you right now, he looked phenomenal. If you remember Chris, like obviously you do, Chris Orr, like that inside physicality, the ability to blitz there. He looks like a version of that. Not quite as strong, but a little faster, I think. So
that's good. Chris Orr had a lot of speed for what he played. I think, obviously he was one of the better middle linebackers we've had. And I don't want to skip off on Daryl Peterson too. I know a lot of the fan base is still kind of up in the air about him, but everybody that's actually been watching has been saying he might be our best outside linebacker. So it's interesting to see. I think, like I said, I think that room, I think, had the biggest change out of everything, and they're substantially better than last year.
Yeah, 100% agree. Just waves of talent and a bunch of different. The last thing I'll say on linebackers, and you and I could do an entire show on linebackers, I feel like, but a bunch of different pieces for different situations, right? You have some bigger, bulkier guys, especially if Witt gets back, that can bulk up. You have some pass rushing guys, and Lafayette can burn the edge. You got inside guys. You got rangy, versatile guys like Jaheim Thomas. You have physical guys like Allegro. And Tyler Chancey's another one. Chancey was another one that flashed as a physical inside linebacker. So, yes, 100% stock way up there. Let's go cornerback. I'll start here. I think it's better. Again, and I don't know if it's that close. I think you have a huge jump from Lofi. You have the interjection of a guy like Xavier Lucas, who's probably going to force his way into 2 deep. He's just too good not to. Another year of Rico. Nizer Forkran, by basically every account, had maybe the best offseason of any Badger. People are raving about him. He looked phenomenal in practice. RJ Delancey's come in and just looked like a really physical, good kind of number 2 guy. I'm telling you, I don't even think this one is that close. Again, I think the cornerback position is significantly better to me.
I got to agree. I would say that it's the second best unit on the team. And it's funny because, first of all, not a lot of guys left. I mean, you get Hallman back, you get Forkran back. Smith had been sort of more or less phased out by Forkran last year, and so in terms of senior guys who were still on that roster, they were kind of phased out. You bring in Delancey, who we thought was going to be a slot guy. Turns out he's probably going to be our second outside guy, for when Hallman or Forkran need a break. Because Lofi has been playing phenomenal. Austin Brown can play in the box as a safety / nickel if we need him to, maybe a larger one. And then, the guys behind them. I mean, Amari Snowden. I mean, that dude, there's not many people that are going to be able to get open on him. He could be a weapon, and we could put him on a tight end. I mean, they're not going to be able to get open on him. Xavier Lucas has an amazingly bright future. Declona, Jace Arnold. These guys are great in great spots right now where we're not relying on them when they're young, but they have a lot of upside. They've been playing well. And it was funny. Whenever the 2 and 3 offense went in there against the 2 and 3 secondaries, man, no one was getting open at all. I mean, it was completely clamped down. And I know a lot of people say, well, is that good for our receivers? Like, don't we want our receivers to be able to generate separation? Listen, I would much rather have in practice our corners locking our receivers down, because it's significantly easier to scheme receivers open than it is to scheme when your corners are getting toasted by receivers. So I'm super high on that room. I said it. This looked like one of the best, if not best, corner units I've seen in the last 10 years at Wisconsin. I mean, maybe that 17 group, but even then, they relied on the pass rush. The pass rush gave them about 2 seconds. All they had to do was sit and cover 4, and no one could throw on them. So, we'll see. But I think this might be one of our better units, if not the best, in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I've made that point too. I think it's really, really good. And, we're pairing with a unit we're about to talk to, the safeties. We're also really good, which gives you a secondary that could be, I mean, that's a whole nother show. Is this the best secondary on paper going into a season that we've had since ... Safeties, last year to this year, again, this one to me seems kind of obvious, but what's your thoughts?
I mean, better. You got Wooler coming back for his senior year, senior captain, leader, heart, soul of defense. You got Latu coming back. Hopefully he, got some glasses in the offseason, is going to make some tackles. But, I mean, when he connects, you feel it. He connected with you. And that's always a great piece to have. You need that sort of, right hook in the backfield to make you question going deep or going across the middle. Preston Zachman, again, another guy who's experienced, who's been around for a while. But then behind that, the young depth. I mean, Braden Moore, he showed out. Austin Brown, again, he's been kind of going back and forth. He showed out. Some of the younger guys coming in. I mean, this secondary is going to be elite. Like we've seen elite defenses at Wisconsin. We know what it takes to play elite defenses. We know what that looks like. This is going to be an elite defense, especially in the secondary. Could there be some issues maybe holding up against the run against certain teams? Perhaps. I mean, we're going to have lighter boxes than typical Wisconsin teams have had in the past. But in terms of overall, this is going to be an elite defense.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the safeties. I mean, you mentioned it. Just getting Wooler. Wooler came back with another 15 pounds of muscle, and he just looks like a force to be
And
reckoned
he
with.
looks like it, too. I mean, that's the crazy thing. They
Looks
all
great.
look like it.
Yeah, he looks great. And I'll throw another name, Owen Arnett, as like a number 5 safety. We saw him get a pick 6 in one of the practices and play really well in a few other moments. Like, that's just a really, coupled with the cornerbacks, that's another really, really deep room. And to hit on Kamoi Latu really quick, if he can cut his tackle rate in half, like he missed about 25% of his tackles last year, I think is the number, which is insane. But if he can just drop that number, then you suddenly have a super physical safety to just punish teams. And that gives you maybe the one missing piece that we don't have in that secondary right now. If he's able to come out and play, and then you have everything. You have cover corners, rangy corners, boundary corners, safeties, versatile players. And then if you have a hitter with Latu, I think that unit's going to be really, really incredible. Which means we both think every unit on the defense is going to be better than last year, and some of them significantly so. That's an interesting one. We're going to put a quick note on that. We got to go to our friends of the show. We're going to go back, talk a little bit Bama, USC. Are they better or worse than last year with Curtis Holland, playmaker? But first, a quick break for our friends of the show. And a quick second, once again, to say thank you for tuning in. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the number one source for all your ticket buying needs. Whatever you need, wherever you need to go over to Game Time, get your tickets, concerts, theaters. You know, if you want to get sporting events, anything from hockey to lacrosse. I know Curtis knows all about lacrosse, to football and basketball, Kohl Center, Camp Randall, wherever you want to go over to Game Time, download the app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. That's over at Game Time. Stop wasting money. Stop wasting time. Go to Game Time. Get the tickets you need over at Game Time. GameTime.com. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. That's Locked On College for $20 off over at Game Time. Okay, let's keep going here. Let's talk a little USC and Alabama early season games. I know you've been digging through this a lot, Curtis. Where are you at on? Let's start with Bama. Obviously, that's the first one.
Yeah, Bama. So obviously, new hire. They lose Nick Saban, who's arguably the greatest coach of all time, and they bring in Kalen DeBoer. I think Kalen DeBoer is an elite coach. Everywhere he's gone, he's had success. He's won a lot. His offenses are very solid. And I think that from an offensive perspective, I think you're going to see a lot more production out of Alabama than they maybe had in the last few years. It seemed like Nick Saban was struggling to hire innovative offensive coaches ever since Sarkisian left. So, I think overall, that's a good hire for them. Now, if you're looking at next year, you got to start kind of going down the list. And this is kind of how I look at when I'm thinking of teams that Wisconsin, what our record could be, how we could play. This is kind of how I break it down. It's the same thing that we just did. You break it down by looking at Bama's team. Well, let's look at it. Quarterback, Jalen Milroe. I think he's going to be better. He's going to be a much better quarterback. He's the third leading rusher. He's getting better quarterback coaching. I think that, he's going to be improved this year. Their offensive line, they returned 3 of their 4 starters, and then 3.5 because I know Proctor was sort of battling for that spot. But if there's a guy better than Proctor, then that's an improvement for them. So overall, I think their line is a lot better too. Where it gets interesting is you start to look at the skill players. So their running backs, they have Jam Miller and oh my gosh, who's their other running back? I had it written down. Justice Haynes. Those guys, younger guys. They didn't really get a ton of reps, but they were both rated like top 3 running backs in the country when they're coming out of school. They're both athletes. They both got skill. They're strong. They're gonna be the feature guys. So yeah, they lose a lot of rushing. They lose their top 2 rushers, but I think that those guys are going to give them a lot. The good news for us is that it's early in the season. They're still kind of green. They're still figuring it out. It's their first major away game where they're the ones that are relied upon to make the plays. And it's going to go the same way with the receivers. They have, 3 new receivers, more or less. A lot of them are young, very highly rated, incredibly talented, but not a lot of playing experience. Still kind of green. They weren't relied on to be the guys when they were at Alabama, right? And so that, to me, tells me at minimum, you're going to see maybe a little regression, right? Maybe if they get the most out of them, it'll be about neutral because they'll probably equate the production of the top guys they had last year. But again, it's early in the season. I think when they play us, they're going to not necessarily be as good as they could be. So it'll be an interesting matchup, to say the least. You have a super experienced secondary in Wisconsin versus rather inexperienced receivers at Alabama who have a ton of talent.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the receiver talent there, right? I think they have 11 4-stars and 1 5-star on their roster in terms of receiving talent. But to your point, none of them are coming in this year with more than 500 receiving yards. I think 403 is their leader. So it is an experienced room. I think my biggest concern there, man, is in the trenches with Bama. That offensive line, 3 of the top 10 interior offensive linemen per Pro Football or College Football Focus, Pro Football Focus are Bama guys. That interior is freaking rock solid. And maybe the one concern we have defensively is holding up against a rushing attack. And then you add Milroe into that. We know what he can do on the ground. I just hope if
that's where it's definitely going to be tough. I think the advantage we have there is, on the outside, specifically on their right side, they lose J.C. Latham. He gets drafted, and so now they got a new right tackle, and they also got a new right guard, right? And so that's kind of where you can look at their line and say, okay, if we're going to attack, that might be where we can get them from. I like our linebackers being able to spy Milroe, but he's just such a freaky athlete. I mean, he can be running one way and chuck it all the way across the field. I mean, you got to be on point on that game. They're going to score some points against us. There's no doubt about that. And if they do, I don't think that's an indictment on our defense. That's just a really athletic team with a really good scheme by a really good offensive coach. Where they get interesting is you got to go to the defensive side of the ball. They lose 7 of their top 10 tacklers from last season. They lose 30 of their 39 sacks from last season. So they're replacing almost all of their defensive production, right? Now they keep their 3. I think they keep their nose tackle, their nose guard, their defensive tackle. The way they do their positions is weird. They got a nose guard, a nose tackle, a D tackle, and like a cash. I don't know. They name them
like a Viper.
Two of the 3 people that are on the line are coming back, and they played decently well to be their second year starting. Solid players. They're also large. Their nose guard is 6'2", 320. Their D tackle is 6'5", 320. So they got some big dudes in the middle. But they're replacing Dallas Turner, who led the team in sacks last year, with a guy who had 1.5 sacks last year. Crondwell, I can't remember what his name is. Something Crondwell. But he's, solid athlete, went to Bama, but still replacing a lot of production there. Their middle linebackers come back. They have some good production there. Their leading tackler actually does come back. So, they'll be solid in the middle. And then in safety, they got Malachi Moore back there. Keon Saab came from Michigan. He's going to be a good player for him. But then you go to the outside. A lot of guys without experience. Corners, that they lost their top 2 corners in Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry to the draft. Now you're relying on guys behind them. They get Domini Jackson from USC. But again, he was on a USC team that, and we'll talk about, they struggled defensively. And I remember when we got a Pac-12 transfer, thought he was going to be good in our secondary, and we saw how that turned out. Right? I mean, I don't know if he's going to necessarily come in and immediately be a thing. And the last thing I'll say on Bama's defense, it's not like DeBoer is known for being a defensive coach. Watch those Washington games again. We can score on that team. So it'll be an interesting game, to say the least. The way I kind of look at it is maybe a more physical version of the LSU bowl game. And we left a lot of points on the field in that LSU bowl game. We should have won that game by a couple touchdowns. So I do feel good about the game. But again, it's Bama. I mean, they got athletes. What are you going to do?
You think we can run on them? See, I think my key for us offensively, because I do think our receivers are going to struggle even against inexperienced Bama cornerbacks to get open easily. I do think we'll have to, to your point, we'll have to scheme up some stuff to get our receivers consistently open outside of maybe Pauling, which means we have to run the ball. We have to, not for 250 yards, not like we normally do against Purdue, but we have to consistently be able to force boxes that are advantageous to us, and we have to consistently force down and distance that are advantageous to us. 2nd and 5, 3rd and 3. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that or not. I think it's going to be the litmus test for us offensively in that game.
Well, that's where I think we'll need our offensive line to really step up and hopefully not get injured, because our offensive line, talent-wise, we're one of the few teams in the country that probably has enough talent offensive line-wise to compete with a Bama defensive line. And that's kind of the advantage of having a Wisconsin team that, we can do that. But the challenge is going to be to do it consistently. They're going to get some plays. I mean, their middle is going to be tough to run on. So we're going to have to get to the outside. We're going to have to catch them in traps. We're going to have to catch them with screens. I think we can do that. I think that those are things that we can do. I mean, you see him do it against our defense. Every now and then it's like one step out of position, and a Chez or a Tawee can crease it. So those are the things that we're going to have to take advantage of. We're going to have to take advantage of the opportunities when they come and play physical. I think we can. And I also think we can get open on them. I think Pauling is good enough to get open on their secondary. I think Trech probably can play in space well against their secondary. And if you're seeing Green and Williams be reliable and catching the ball, I think there'll be times when they'll be able to get catches for first downs, quick 10-yard outs. So that'll I think that's where we can compete with them.
Dude, I'm so excited for that game. Like, I almost just want to sim through the first 2 weeks. I mean, obviously not, because every Badger game is amazing. But all right, let's talk about USC then. You follow up Bama with USC. This team to me is kind of fascinating, right? For a 7-win team, the amount of hype they get because of the USC brand, losing Caleb Williams, revamping the defensive coordinator spot, bringing in some impact transfers on that side as well, former Pac-12 guys. But what are your thoughts on USC here?
Well, hey, real quick before we go on USC, I just want to say, in terms of Bama overall, I think they're probably going to be about the same as last year. I think their offense is better. I think their defense is worse. I think it ends up being about the same. So
which is really good.
Yeah, which is really good. No, they're going to be a good team. I think they will take some losses, but that's different kind of conversation. But I think they'll be a really solid team. Now going on to USC, digging into them is super interesting. So for starters, you look at their quarterback. All right, I don't really care what anybody says. You lose Caleb Williams, that's a loss. You're not going to replace Caleb Williams. He was their third leading rusher, which is a big deal. He could scramble, extend plays. He could find the open guys. The reason they were able to do a lot of things they were able to do is because he was running around the backfield for 5 seconds before he threw the ball down the field. But he also could stand in the pocket and deliver strikes. I mean, there's a reason he was number 1 overall pick. There's a reason he won a Heisman. You're not replacing him with Miller Moss. I'm sorry, that's just not happening. Watch the bowl game with Miller Moss again. I tell people to do this. He had great stats in that bowl game. But if you actually watch the game, his passes were late. They were behind. Louisville's defense, not the greatest in the world. Jeff Brom defenses, we know a little bit about that. We never lost Jeff Brom's defenses, right? So, they were okay. But a lot of that was plays were made by the receivers. A lot of that was schemed by Lincoln Riley, which is still a great offensive-minded coach. He's going to do a great job scheming plays. So definitely got to be on the lookout for that. But the ironic thing about it, too, just looking at our matchup, is they run the same offense almost we do. So we see this every day in practice. So we know what to prepare for when we play them. Now you go to their running backs. Their running backs are going to take a step back. They lose their leading rusher. They have younger guys. They take a transfer in from Mississippi State. Had about 400 yards rushing last year. Averaging is like 4.7 yards a carry. I don't think that's going to cut it in the Big Ten. You look at their receivers. Their receivers, I think, too, is going to be a little bit of a downgrade. They lose their top 2 guys, NFL guys, and then they keep Branch, and then they lose the next 2 guys in terms of receiving numbers. Now, Branch is going to be a great receiver for him, but Branch isn't much different than Pauling, and we see Pauling every single day in practice. Branch plays very similar to Trech, and we see Trech every day in practice. Now, Branch might be better than both those 2 players. I'm not saying that, but in terms of scheme and how they're going to use him, he's not much different than what we see every day in practice, right?
Yeah, I would say he's more explosive than Pauling. Like, definitely more. And by the way, I will point out that us seeing Trech every day in practice, we see him burn our guys quite a bit at times.
That's true, but at the same time, it's like we know how to prepare for that. Is all I'm saying. And then when you look at their other guys, I think you got a couple new. Mekhi White is a new guy for them. Deuce Robinson, I think they moved him to receiver. At least that's what it said online. I'm not sure how I could that. He's a big 6'5" target athlete, kind of like a Kyle Pitts type. He's going to be a pain in the ass to cover, but at the same time, he's still young. He's a sophomore. This is his first year really getting serious play time. Jacoby White, I think, was the other receiver they had. Again, solid, but they're new. They're inexperienced. They're not senior wide receivers. Brendan Rice going to the draft. They lose Mario Williams, who transferred to Utah, of all places, for whatever reason. They lose a couple other guys, too. So I think that is a little bit of a net negative for them. And then you go to their offensive line. At maximum, to me, it's a push. They had to move their left tackle to center, right? And then I believe their right guard is the only returning starter. Otherwise, there's 3 new starters. So I think, at the end of the day, a lot of people don't understand their line was really good last year. The reason they looked like they weren't so good is because Caleb Williams would break the pocket and run all over the place. Right. And it's like, how are you going to block for that? You know what I mean? So it's like, so that might be a down for them too. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on their offense, just looking at it.
Yeah, I mostly agree with you. Like, there's no replacing a Caleb Williams. As much as you want to laud Lincoln Riley, there's no way you hold serve when you lose the 1 draft pick in the NFL, the most important spot in football. It's just not happening. Now, I do think there is something to be said about. I heard this theory. I was listening actually to a USC podcast at a recent road trip, and they were talking about the idea that Lincoln Riley has been looking for a quarterback that he controls, probably the wrong word, but a quarterback that he can trust more to make the reads he wants when he schemes things up, and not a guy who's just going to kind of scramble around and cause chaos, which can be good and bad, right? We saw that Caleb Williams offense was amazing, and they lost 5 games. I think he Lincoln Riley might want a little more control overall in the game script. And maybe that's why you're looking at a guy like Miller Moss, who's more of an executor, more of a scheme guy, more of a I'll go where the reads take me type of a guy.
Maybe, but my caveat to that is Lincoln Riley's never had that. Lincoln Riley's always had a guy at the quarterback spot, like a gunslinger, like Baker Mayfield, a guy who ran around like a psycho, like oh my gosh, why can't I remember? Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, even Spencer Rattler a little bit before they shifted to Caleb Williams, who's the biggest exemplar of that, was a game-breaking quarterback who could run around the backfield and just make crazy plays because he was so talented. This is the kind of the first normal. I hate to say it like that's
normal. Yeah, I know.
He was a really good quarterback in his own right, but the first like non-crazy athlete quarterback that Lincoln Riley's had. And so yeah, they can say that. That's something that to me, and again, I don't want to say this because this can easily be thrown back at us, but that feels like copium to me. You need a guy who can just stand in the pocket and deliver the ball where it's supposed to go. It's like, bro, you've only had Heisman Trophy caliber quarterbacks before. Like,
yeah,
you just don't have one right now. That's the reality of it.
And not to take the entire thing on the quarterback spot, but don't you think he could have his pick of basically whoever he wants, though? Like, to me,
well, and he did. He got Malachi Nelson. Turns out maybe he wasn't the quarterback that they thought he was, and so that's kind of where they're at.
But to me, that kind of points to he thinks Miller Moss is special too. Because like he can basically have his pick and choose.
I'll say this: Miller Moss was not his recruit. I would say that he's rolling with Miller Moss because he doesn't have a better option. They went in the portal and got the quarterback from UNLV. They originally, I think his plan was to get Malachi Nelson to be the next Caleb Williams. Well, Malachi Nelson transferred to Boise, and he might not even start there. And so now you're looking at Lincoln Riley saying, oh, crap, what do I do now? Well, you have this guy who's worked his butt off for the last 3 years, who knows the offense, who can, to the point of the USC guy, stay in the pocket, run the plays. And that's why you put him, in the quarterback spot. I think that was his best option. And I'm not, again, I'm not trying to, talk negative about Miller Moss or anything like that. For all I know, he could be the leader in passing in the Big Ten and be amazing, be another Heisman Trophy winner by Lincoln Riley. But that's just kind of the vibe I get from it.
No, I think that's really well said. And it's a great point you brought up with his quarterback history and how big of a departure Moss is. I don't think people are talking about that enough. It's one of the reasons we have you on is the insight. Yeah, I think that you could be dead on with that. Let's shift to defense because you and I both agree the offense is going to take a step back. Even if Miller Moss is that dude, you don't lose Caleb Williams and replace that 1-for-1 in year one with Miller Moss. Defense is going to be better because it was 116th, I think, in point allowed last year. It literally can't be worse. And they actually made a move.
Well, don't tell Iowa's offense that.
It's true. I said that for like 3 years with Iowa's offense, and I'm going to say it again this year. But they did make an actual legitimate move. UCLA defensive coordinator coming over, had a really good year last year with UCLA. I caveat that with some degree because he's been a defensive coordinator for 1 year, Anthony Lynn, and last year he did not face Oregon. Like he didn't face the best. So I think his stats were a little inflated, but that was still a really good physical UCLA defense. And I think they made a good hire, and they've at least tried to address it. Defense better or worse than last year?
So I'm with you. I mean, it can't be worse, right? I mean, that'd be absurd. If it is worse, then I think Lincoln Riley needs to be canned because you're never going to survive in the Big Ten like that. Looking at UCLA's defense, to your point, it was interesting because when I looked at their stats, they would have been our fourth best Jim Leonhard defense, right? So we've seen good defense. We know what good defense looks like. And he's a good coach. I'm not trying to say that's an indictment on him not being a good coach. Jim Leonhard is an amazing coach. So, but in terms of them being an elite defense, it's like, yeah, it's good. It's not as good as what we've seen. We've seen better defenses. We've played against better defenses. In terms of USC, they brought in a lot of transfers to start, which is concerning because while the transfers they brought in are solid, I mean, their D-line, their first three guys are going to be solid players. They got one guy from Vanderbilt who's going to be, solid for them. They still got that nose tackle from Georgia. I can't remember anybody's names right now. I'm struggling on that. But he's going to be solid for them in the middle too. But once you get kind of behind that in the D-line and in the linebackers, you get behind some of their transfers for the linebackers, you get to guys who have not played. And not only that, Tackett was ahead of most of these guys going into last year, right? And they're still in the 2 deep. They're still behind the guys they brought in. Their depth in the front seven is not there. It's non-existent. Like once you get past their starters, they are kind of screwed. And that's going to be, and I'm not saying anything that I don't think anybody at USC who's really watching them is also saying. I mean, their depth is just right now, they're hoping some guys develop. They're hoping some linebackers step up. But once you get past the starters, they're going to struggle. And the good news for us is they play Michigan the week before us.
I know that is a physical one too, man. And I'll say this too, like you got to start somewhere. Like if let's say you bought, and let's be honest, what was USC's defense last year? It was a fixer upper house, right? That you're coming into. It was a broken down, everything's busted up. The lawn has been mowed in 6 years. The windows are broken out. That doesn't get fixed in day one. It doesn't get fixed in week one. It's much like our team last year. This culture is still to some degree being rebuilt a little bit. It didn't get fixed in day one. Anthony Lynn could come in and do a great job. That there's still guys in there that aren't his guys, and there's still pieces in that thing that need to be rebuilt a little. That's going to take longer. Some of the guys they revamped their defensive backfield. They revamped some of their linebacker core.
Yeah, I got the names finally. I was able to get them. So linebacker they brought in Easton Mascarenas Arnold from Oregon State. He's going to be solid from the middle. Mason Cobb returns. He's going to be good for them. And then, the guy I was thinking of, Bear Alexander in the middle. He's going to be solid. I mean, they're going to have a solid front, like starter group of front seven players. It's once you get past that where they start to struggle. Ironically, about that point, what you said, changing the culture. I mean, the Big Ten Network, they talked about it when they went to visit their team. It's still an offensive-driven program. They didn't really tackle a lot in practice. They weren't really hitting. They weren't super physical. That's a problem. You need that physicality. I think Fickle's on to something when you say you need physicality to really learn how to tackle, really learn how to do that in the big moments. So that's going to be something that'll be interesting to be seen. And I know we're kind of getting tight on time here. Looking at their secondary, I know they bring in a couple guys from UCLA. I believe it's John Humphrey is the one they bring in from UCLA. They bring in a couple other guys too. Listen, their first 4 outside corners are all over 6'2". And they've all played. They're all experienced players. A lot of them are coming in from other schools, but even the guys from USC, they got some great guys. And then you look at their 2 starting safeties. They're both transfers in. It's Akali Arnold and Kamari Ramsey. Kamari Ramsey started at UCLA last year. Akali Arnold, I believe he was at Mississippi State. He started there as well.
Or Oregon State for Arnold.
Oregon State, yeah. And then the guy behind that was one of USC starters last year. So they're it's kind of ironic. Their defense, the strengths are pretty much mimic ours. I mean, they got a really strong corner group. They have a really strong secondary with safety. So overall, I mean, I think the defense is going to take a step up. I don't think you can't not take a step up. I think they're going to struggle in the front 7. I think this is a team that we can run the ball on.
Yeah,
in fact, I fairly confidently feel like we can run the ball on this team, especially the week after they play Michigan. They're going to get beat up. They're gonna get hit like they never been hit before. I know they're talking about, well, we're big, we athletes, we're tough, we're USC. It's like y'all haven't been that USC since Carroll left in like 2011. What I'm saying? You're not ready for what Michigan's about to bring to the table on you. Even if you beat Michigan, your defense is gonna hurt for a week. You know what I'm saying? And then you're gonna have to play our offensive line, which is not much smaller.
No, that's a tough spot for them to be in, man. Because Michigan is Michigan's missing many pieces from last year. They're not missing the physicality in the trenches. Like they still have that component, and they're still going to beat the hell out of USC. And then a part of me wishes we would get USC later in the year because I think their depth is going to get worn down in the Big Ten. But a part of me is also super grateful that we get them right after Michigan because I think that's a prime opportunity to pounce on them when they might be 90%.
Well, and we also get a bye right before it too, which is great for us to recover from the Alabama game, which in and of itself is going to be a physical game. So, but yeah, overall, I would say USC, I think at maximum, they're the same because their defense improves, their offense regresses. But honestly, I don't think they did enough defensively to address the shortcomings such that it makes up for the losses on the offense. I think they're going to be worse, just straight up. And it's tough for me to really see it. And just because, again, like that depth just isn't there on the defensive side of the ball. Again, they have good players and they're going to be tough to throw on. There's no denying that. I think DeAnthony Lynn's going to put them in great position to be successful, if not by just lining them up properly. Kind of like Nebraska last year. I thought Nebraska's defense improved tremendously just because they freaking lined up properly. You know what I'm saying? So like that's going to make a difference. But again, I don't think they're going to be that much better. In fact, I don't even know if they're going to be better. I think they're going to be at most the same, if not a little worse. So
I'm going to call them a push. I'm going to call them a push just because I have too much faith in Lincoln Riley's offense to see it fall off the cliff. I mean, essentially going back the last 8 years, he's had a top 5 yards per attempt, adjusted attempt, I think is the stat offensively. He just doesn't, now granted, to your point, he's always had a mobile quarterback and maybe that changes this year. Maybe that changes the entire dynamic of it. I just don't think he's ever going to put a bad offense out there. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I think
no. And like I said, I think if they're able to improve defensively and maintain some offensive cohesion, and maybe they don't do as well as they did the year before, but they look like they're making some right strides, then I think Lincoln can bring that team around. I think he's the coach. The book isn't written on him yet, but he has to improve the way he works his defense in.
Yeah.
And here's my other question, and I raised this to all the Discord and everybody. Lincoln Riley runs an air raid offense. It's almost exactly the same as Wisconsin's. The way they run their running schemes, their blocking schemes, guard, tackle, pull, all that stuff, everything Ryan Anderson talks about, it's basically the same. The main difference is they've had Heisman caliber quarterbacks. I ask you, what gives you faith in Lincoln Riley's offense over a Phil Longo offense? What is it that makes those two so different outside of you got a Caleb Williams at Lincoln Riley and maybe some higher end recruits? Why do you think that offense can succeed and ours can't? That's always been my question.
It's probably just that though. I mean, not to be Captain Obvious, but can Phil Longo land a Caleb Williams? Right. And we've seen it to some degree. Drake May and those guys certainly is, but can he do it at Wisconsin? He has to do it. He has to do it consistently year after year. And that's the thing with Lincoln Riley is he never has a bad quarterback. He never has a mediocre quarterback. He doesn't have a Tanner Mordecai that throws 9 touchdown passes, right? That's it. I mean, and you're totally dead on right. But Longo has to prove he can do it in Madison, has to prove he can do it consistently. And that's the one thing Lincoln Riley has done. Like, he always has a good quarterback. We've talked about it. So, yeah, man, we're going to wrap it up here. We went a little long, but, man, when I get Curtis on the show, no, great, man. When I get Curtis on the show, we could probably just keep talking for another 20 or 30 minutes if we wanted to. He is Curtis Holland. Go check him out on the Discord. Go follow us over there as well. This is Locked On Badgers. As always, really do appreciate everybody tuning in. For your second listen, go check out Locked On College Football. 24/7 stream on the Locked On Network, all your college football news. Curtis, Ryan, on Wisconsin. Talk later.